Welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show tonight. Yet another great show. We're going to be talking with my good friend Brien Foerster about his new book, which of course I don't have the title for in my hand, but we're going to be talking about elongated skulls again. And from what I understand, there's some new groundbreaking information that we're going to be the first people to hear about it. That's exciting. Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can find out about all the products and services I offer, including medical intuition evaluations, energy healings, or psychic readings. So again, if there's stuff going on in your life, you got some health concerns, you got issues at work, problems in your relationship, give me a call. Set up a time for a private consultation. We can dig right into your issues and help come up with some solutions to your problems. It's also brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com, where you can jumpstart your intuition today by downloading their free 50-page guide. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. Over the last several weeks, I've been talking about how people can go to Amazon.com and download my movie Icon, Deconstructing the Archetypes of the Ancients. Well, one of the things that I've been doing over the last few weeks is putting some other videos up on Amazon Digital Download. And the newest one that has just hit Amazon is called In the Name of God, where it looks at customs, morals, and laws from a universality point of view. It was just released today, so $1.99, can't beat it. In the Name of God. Okay, so let's get Brien on the air. So I guess I should be organized today, but I just am not. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about Brien Foerster, and we will bring him on the air. Brien Foerster is an authority on the megalithic work of South America and the perplexing ancient elongated headed people of the area. Founder of Hidden Inca Tours, Brien divides his time between Paracas, Peru, and Cusco and the surrounding area, where he offers tours of sacred sites. His website also offers hours, and I'm telling you people, hours of footage, which he shares with the mysteries of strange locations with all of us. His webpage is hiddenincatours.com. So please welcome back to Just Energy Radio, Brien Foerster. Hey, Brien, how are you?
Great, doctor. How about you?
I am excellent, excellent, excellent. It is always so nice to have you on the show and have the opportunity to learn more about what is all going on with you and what you've learned since the last time you talked. And I know that you have like some new information for us that is like hot off the press. And I hope we're going to be able to get that far. And, you know, because I want to kind of save it, but then I'm afraid that if I save it, it won't get out. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting is on the cover of your book, Elongated Skulls, there's an image, excuse me, of, you know, what it looks like a reconstructed face, of one of these elongated skulls. Has anybody gone and actually done a facial reconstruction on one of the skulls from South America?
Well, different people have tried. I've seen some examples done by academics that are actually quite crude, but there's an artist called Mark Laplume who is presently in the United States. He's done 3,000 or 4,000 drawings of the elongated skulls from around the world. And the one you're referring to is a 3D modeling done by Marcia K. Moore.
Well, but that was based off of measurements from a real skull. I mean, it's not, I guess that's my biggest question, because the cranium looks huge. It looks twice the size of the face.
What happens is that I send Marcia a number of photos of a specific skull, and from that she's able to do a 3D model. She's actually Native American herself, so she's very used to the facial features of Native people, which we presume the Paracas are. So I think she's done the finest rendition so far.
I just think it really adds to the dilemma that we face when talking about some of these skulls, because you see it's, just the skull sitting on the shelf and it looks bizarre, but then you actually give it features and it kind of takes it to a completely different level.
Very much so.
Okay, so let me see. When we talk about elongated skulls, how far does it go back in time?
Well, in terms of cranial deformation, which is where a baby's head has been bound in order to alter the shape, that goes back possibly 50,000 years into the Middle Eastern area, specifically a cave in Iraq. But in general, the most common ones date from around 2,000 to 3,000 or so years ago.
So that would just make them about 1,000 BC. And are we well, no, you just said Iraq. See, I haven't ever seen that 50,000 number. I've heard 10,000. But let me ask, because that's that Shanandar cave.
That's right.
So is that, I just have a question, like, from a totally different thing. Is that where they found some of the earliest burials?
That's very true. And I think only one skull was ever found, somewhat in bad condition. But in general, we are talking in most commonly 2,000 years ago up to maybe 5,000 to possibly 10,000 years ago, when you have like a number of them. The Shanandar cave one is, since only one's been found, you can't really figure out much from it.
So it's just kind of, in the big picture of things, an anomaly at this point in time.
Yeah, basically. It is the oldest carbon-dated cranially deformed skull, but there's not a lot that you can, conclude from one example. Whereas when you go to parts of Peru where, hundreds of them have been found in specific cultures, then, of course, you can figure out a lot more about who these people were.
How widespread is it? You brought forward so much information about the skulls in Peru, but from what I understand, it's not just isolated to Peru. You were just talking about Iraq or Iran. How widespread was this practice around the world?
It's been found, or skulls have been found that have been cranially deformed on every continent except Antarctica so far.
Well, and that's definitely the so far part.
Yeah.
Do we find just a few incidences? We're obviously going to get more into what's going on in Peru, but do we find more instances in any other place than in Peru, or was there some area in the world that it seemed to be a very common practice?
Well, that's a real complex question, but for example, a number of elongated skulls have been found in Germany and Austria and parts of France, and they're the result of the migration of the Hun people, as in Attila the Hun, who practiced cranial deformation, and they originated in the Caspian Sea area. So that's the connection with all of those that have been found in Europe are probably the movement of the Hun westward. Then you find anomalous ones in Australia that they have no idea who these people were. The ones in Australia clearly were not Aboriginal native people. They seem to be almost Caucasoid people. So you're talking about an interesting migration there. And then in China and that area, it's a little more obscure as regards origins.
One of the things they were asking in the chat room, and I think you probably have more information on it than I do, was elongated skulls in Egypt. I know that for a really long time they thought, everything started in Egypt and moved around the world. Have there been a lot of elongated skulls found in that region?
That's a great question, and the answer is no. None of the Egypt researchers that I know, such as Stephen Mailer, have ever seen one example of an actual elongated skull in Egypt. I found a photograph of one in a collection in England, but its provenance is unknown. So what you're talking about in Egypt is you're talking about an artistic portrayal, mainly during the time of Akhenaten. But as regards actual elongated skulls, I'm hoping someday we'll find a number of them, but so far the number appears to be 0.
Even Akhenaten and Tutankhamun didn't have elongated skulls?
Well, actually, Tutankhamun's skull I've seen 2 or 3 times, and it is different. It is elongated backwards, and he has a depression on the top of his head. So he seems to be kind of different, but there's no real proof that Akhenaten's mummy has ever been found, and the same with Nefertiti. So the only possible Egyptian evidence we have is Tutankhamun himself.
Okay. And I always find that really interesting that even though in the region they had that practice, and in Egypt they wore, they had and I don't know whether it was the north or the south that had the kind of pointy hat that they wore that would definitely hold a nice elongated skull in it, that they haven't found elongated skulls.
Well, actually, Akhenaten's story is absolutely fascinating. And what he seemed to be doing is since he was involved in almost a rebirth of the culture of Egypt, like a renaissance, he was bringing information from very distant in the past, all the way back possibly to Osiris and Isis. And of course, Osiris is very often shown with either an elongated head or a very huge hat, which one would presume is hiding an elongated head.
Okay, that's interesting. But, there is the belief that they were emulating the gods. And so if he had an elongated head and people were emulating him, then it would make sense to me.
Well, it does. And actually, the whole concept of who was Osiris just some myth, or was Osiris an ancestor that did look quite different than, modern day people?
And we don't know, but one day we might actually figure it out.
That's right.
Can you talk briefly about the different kinds of the method of cranial deformation? Because from what I understand, not all cranial deformation is the same.
No, that's true. The most common practice, let's say amongst the Native American people, a lot of cranial deformation was done on the west coast of Canada and into Washington and Oregon, and that is what is called cradle boarding, where the baby was kept in a cradle, and then another board was attached to where the top of the head would be, and so there would be gradual flattening of the head, and that's where basically the so-called flathead Indians, their description came from cradle boarding. Other practices are binding of textiles with a stiff material like a board in the front and the back of the skull in order to flatten and also extend the height of the skull. Those are the two most common practices. A third was a practice done by the Mangbetu people of the Congo of Western Africa, and that was more just sheer binding in order to try to achieve almost a cone head kind of look.
Any thoughts on why, other than to look like the gods, why they would use or do something like that?
Well, the three most common reasons, if you are able to ask descendants of these people, or if you're able to look up in oral tradition or any written record, it was only done amongst the nobility class, like the priesthood and the more regal people. And they said, number one, it made our children more intelligent. Number two, we find it aesthetically pleasing. And number three, this is what our ancestors looked like.
I like that.
Yeah. There you're hinting at ancestors that may have actually looked like that, as in being born like that.
Well, but there's also the connection that there was a belief in these indigenous cultures that if you look like that, you would be smarter, making the assumption that these other people were smarter.
Well, that, and also, the royal class wanted to look distinct as compared to the general population. So they may have wanted to enhance themselves this way in order to show that they come from a different origin than the common folk.
Exactly. Have you found any patterns of distribution of the skulls as far as using one method? Like you said that in the Pacific Northwest, they did a lot of cradle boarding. But have you found any distribution patterns as far as methodologies used in different areas?
Well, I've mainly been focusing on Peru and Bolivia. And of course, that's the reason why I wrote the book, because there has been such a profusion of cranial deformation being performed in many different cultures. And so I've been able to more or less figure out what culture is related to another culture to some degree based on the fact that they practiced cranial deformation.
But are you doing that based on the technique that they're using?
Yeah, the basic technique used in Peru and Bolivia, again, is where a newborn child of royal blood, their head is bound with a textile, and then over time, the textile is, the pressure is increased, and a board is put usually in the back and sometimes in the front, and in the course of 2 to 3 years, once the skull calcifies properly, then that child has that shape permanently.
It just seems like it would be a painful and uncomfortable process to put an infant through.
Well, the thing is, since you're dealing with royal children, whoever is doing this practice would have to be an absolute expert. Because if you were to induce a lot of pain in a royal child, you might wind up dead. Or if you happen to if you happen to make a mistake in the process and kill the royal child, then I think you would definitely be dead. So I get the feeling that it was such a gradual procedure done by absolute experts that I think especially the Paracas culture had absolutely mastered this process, and I don't think there would have been that much pain involved, taking into account the level of society that you're inducing this on or working with.
I don't know. Even just looking at it kind of gives me a headache. So think, Okay, well, let's kind of turn our attention to Peru and Bolivia. And I'm just trying to like map stuff out in my mind. Have you found any relationships between where skulls have been found and some of the ancient sites that are in those regions?
Definitely. I think possibly the most important one is, the mysterious place called Tiwanaku, which some of your listeners may have heard of. Pumapunku is part of that complex. It's a very mysterious series of stone structures that could not have been made initially by the so-called Tiwanakan people. But the Tiwanaku culture existed between about 100 AD and 900 AD, and the culture that came before them, that lived farther south, were called the Wankarani, and they had massively elongated skulls. So it's my belief that the Wankarani migrated north to the site called Tiwanaku, which is on the southern shore of Lake Titicaca in Bolivia, and they became the Tiwanakan culture. And I also believe that the Inca culture then sprang forth from the Tiwanakan culture. And what almost nobody knows is that the Inca themselves performed cranial deformation. It was a practice that was outlawed as soon as the Spanish reached Cusco. They were horrified by this, and so they forbid it happening. So it was only the very first contact of the Spanish with the Inca that they would have seen any examples of the Inca having elongated skulls. And after that, the rest of the Inca generations would simply have looked normal, quote unquote.
Yeah, because I guess they basically took out the government, which would have been all the royals. And once you started going into the outskirt areas, they probably weren't practicing it, or it was not as important in the outlying regions.
Yeah, again, it was only done to the Inca royalty, and the Spanish outlawed it as soon as they arrived in Cusco, which was the capital city of the Inca. And some of the Inca continued to practice it, and so another law was set into place forbidding it happening.
Those stinky explorers just messing everything up. So you gave some dates of the general dating of elongated skulls around the world. What about in South America? Do we have any dating ideas for some of the skulls found there?
Yeah, one or two examples have been found that date back to either 6,000 BC or 6,000 years ago. They were found in a cave in central Peru, but they're not really profound looking. Again, it's just simple cradle boarding or binding, creating a slightly different shape. But what's more important is this migration from central Bolivia up to the shore of Lake Titicaca, and then from there up to Cusco, which was the capital city of the Inca. And all of the other cultures, I've found relationships chronologically between basically those highland groups of the Tiwanakans and their influence with others. But the most obscure and to me fascinating ones are the Paracas people who lived on the coast of Peru and basically disappeared 2,000 years ago, their origin being completely unknown.
So you don't think they were associated with the Tiwanakans at all?
No, I don't think so. I think what happened was when the Paracas culture basically began to disappear about 2,000 years ago, I think some of them migrated into the highlands, and the elongated skull aspect was something which also influenced cultures in the highlands.
Do you think the Paracas culture was before the Tiwanakans?
Yeah, even with conventional archaeology, they're talking about the Paracas appearing as a culture 800 BC. So that's about 800 years before Tiwanaku formed as a culture itself.
I find that dating interesting. So now I'm going to ask some non-elongated skull questions. Were they associated with domestication of animals and beginning of agriculture in that region also?
The Paracas people?
Uh-huh.
Well, the weird thing about what fascinates me is that almost nobody has studied the Paracas for about 50 years. And not only taking the elongated skull thing into account, they were a very advanced society. They had mastered agriculture, 800 around 800 BC. Again, origins unknown. They were masters at making the finest textiles in all of South America. They knew the concept of the potter's wheel. They also had reddish brown hair, which is not typically Native American.
And that's not common in that region.
It's only
except there.
It's only common in Paracas and possibly amongst the Inca.
But that might just be people that immigrated or, moved. Where is Paracas? If you were going to give us a landmark of where Paracas was, where would that be?
Okay, well, Peru is the third country down in South America on the west coast. You start with Colombia, then you go to Ecuador, and then you go to Peru. And Peru is about 1,000 miles long. The coastline is about that length. And Lima, which is the capital city, is about halfway down. So if you travel by car 4 hours south, you reach the Paracas Peninsula, which is just before you reach the area called Nazca, where the fascinating lines and geoglyphs are.
Were they the ones responsible for the lines and the geoglyphs?
They were responsible for starting them, yes. Actually, that's another story that most people don't know about. And I wrote another book about the Nazca geoglyphs and lines because it was the Paracas who began making them around, conventionally speaking, 500 BC. And then with their demise about 100 BC or 180, then the Nazca culture becomes dominant, and then they continue creating the lines and geoglyphs in a southeasterly direction.
But I find that interesting because one of the things that I know is that one of the 3 oldest ochre mines was also found in that region. The oldest and biggest ochre mines, with one being in South America, one being in Australia, one of my favorite countries, and one being in the Nazca region.
That's interesting. The Nazca area, which is complete desert, is actually very rich in minerals, including gold. And actually, the Paracas area has a lot of ochre. That's true. We found some, as we've been traveling in the desert, you find red ochre, yellow ochre, and even white ochre.
Mm-hmm. But I just find that interesting that it all kind of, to me, it seems like there are these little centers where you find these little upspurts of stuff all condensed. And it sounds like Paracas is one of those epicenters.
Well, most definitely. And one of the intriguing things about the agriculture is Paracas and the area get less than 1 inch of rain a year, but water travels in underground streams and rivers from the highlands of Peru to the east, even as far as the Andes, and then empty into the ocean. So the Paracas were able to access the underground water, and they actually made their fields down about 6 feet from the typical landscape in order to catch these underground streams and rivers that were traveling to the sea. And so they actually grew phenomenal amounts of food.
So another engineering feat that we really don't hear about.
Exactly. And this also ties in with why some of the Nazca lines were made, because there are at least 5 or 10 major theories about why a people would create these geoglyphs and lines in the middle of the desert, anything from astronomy to aliens. But that's why I wrote my book, because it's a study of 1,000 years of production of these lines and geoglyphs for different reasons, depending upon the culture and depending upon the reasoning at the time.
So why do you think that they created them?
Well, it really depends on the time frame. The whole system of lines and geoglyphs begins at Paracas itself in the northwest and travels down at least 200 miles, I think, in a southeasterly direction through the Nazca area. And one of the largest figures is called the candelabro, which looks like a fork or a trident on the side of a mountain that can only be seen from the ocean.
Gives you thoughts of Neptune, doesn't it?
Well, it gives you thoughts of a maritime beacon or a giant symbol that a seafaring people would want to use in order to find home.
Oh, good point. Good point. And you can see it from the water, so it's not like the other glyphs that you really need to be in the air in order to view.
That's right. Yeah, you can only see this one from the ocean, and you can see it at least 15 miles away. It's
no way.
Oh, it's 450 feet tall.
But 15 miles is far.
It is, but it's a really intriguing area. It wasn't like carved into sand. It was carved into a light or a soft sandstone, which has a lot of salt in it because the Paracas area was the ocean that was uplifted during major earth changes. And so there's a lot of salt still in that sand. So when the sun reflects, or when the sun is shining, it makes the contours contrast much greater than if it was any other kind of sandy material. So you can see it from quite a distance, and even in a full moon, you can see it from a distance.
Oh, I bet that's cool.
Yeah.
I bet that's cool. All right, I'm going to shift gears here a little bit. I know that remains of infants or very young children with elongated skulls have been found. And I'm assuming you've seen them. Well, actually, I've seen you with a picture holding one, or, you've posted pictures. How young is it believed that the youngest child was before he or she passed?
Well, the youngest I've seen, I'm not a doctor, obviously, but at a guess, I would say easily less than a year. And that's in a really tiny museum right next to the Nazca airport. And that little child has an elongated skull and also has reddish blonde hair.
Oh, so you get a double on that one.
Oh, yeah.
Are there any other anomalies with this skeleton?
Not with that one, but there are other ones. There's another one which is in one of the Cusco museums, and it again appears to be between 12 and 14 months old, and it is literally a cone, like it is a Dan Aykroyd cone head shape. And then the most intriguing one is in a small museum outside of Cusco, and its skull is the size of its torso, and it was medically examined by 6 doctors in Cusco in a private hospital almost a year ago, and they were just confounded by it. They couldn't figure out what it is they were looking at. They definitely ruled out cranial deformation. They all agreed that this child was born with this very large skull, that it was very natural looking, and it has a number of different anatomical features which do not make sense whatsoever to anyone who has studied normal human anatomy.
Such as?
Well,
don't tease us that way.
Oh, I love it. Well, no, such as the most obvious thing is that the skull is literally the size of the torso, and the doctors have ruled out any known disease such as hydrocephaly, etc. The eye sockets are very shallow, so they believe that the eyeballs literally protruded outwards from the skull. It only has 10 sets of ribs where it should have 12. The rib cage appears to be upside down. What else? The dentition is very strange. The teeth appear to be from quite an older individual, and they also found evidence that that this child was ritually sacrificed by receiving a blow in the back of the head.
That's because it was the alien devil child. No.
Well, it was the weird one of a kind in the village child, that's for sure.
Did it have red hair too?
Unfortunately, there's no hair left. Yeah.
Okay, so let's kind of put that one to the side because it's, even more of an anomaly. But the other two that you were talking about, I mean, is a year enough time, do you think, with using the, cranial modification to produce a skull to be that shape?
Well, the doctors that I've taken to these museums to look at them are just astonished because some believe that the process would have killed the child, but also they can't. In those two cases, they can't see how the cranial deformation was done because the skulls look too natural. They're very complex in terms of curvature. They're not simply flattened. They are, multifaceted in terms of curvature, and so they just shake their heads when they look at them.
Because they can't figure out. Well, let me ask a different question. We've seen ones of adults. If you've looked at any of the elongated skull pictures, they've all seemed like adults. And then there are the couple that look like little infants. Are there ones that are in between, 10, 12-year-old children that have been found? Sure.
Yeah, the most common ones are actually appear to be in their 20s, 30s, 40s, or older. And one I'm still trying to track down is there's a drawing of an 8-month-old fetus that was drawn about 100 years ago. And that one, again, the head is the size of the body, but I haven't been able to find out where where this fetus is. Theoretically, it's in one of the warehouses of the main museum in Lima, but that one I would like to definitely find.
All right, I'm not going to make my comment. Okay, but wait a minute. I'm thinking about what you just said. You said fetus?
Yeah.
So, that would be like a child that's not born yet.
That is a child that could not have had its skull cranially deformed. It would have to come out of mom, with those features.
That's kind of interesting. Okay, so this question has been floating around the chat room, but I just keep ignoring it. So, is there the possibility that the skulls that we see, or a percentage of the skulls that we see, are natural?
That's what I'm starting to believe. I would say maybe 2 or 3% of the ones that I've seen defy any possibility that they could have been some form of cradle boarding or deformation, because they appear to be very natural and complex looking. The feature, all the curves and features are very beautiful. They're not contorted or flattened or altered like what cranial deformation usually produces. So I think, I honestly believe that at least in Peru and Bolivia, the lineage goes back to a sub-race or a subset of humanity that was born with elongated skulls.
But, okay, right, that kind of adds like this whole other big twist to the whole thing. Because if they were born with elongated skulls, then it would imply to me that it was based on interaction with those people that the cultures around the world started modifying their heads to emulate. And so could it be that Paracas was an originating location for humanity?
No, I think they were the end. I think they were the end of the line. I think they were the last of a subspecies of people that migrated to Paracas from another part of the world, possibly to escape persecution of some kind.
But you have not heard of or experienced other skulls that have the same characteristics in other places in the world yet?
Not the actual skulls themselves, but a lot of artistic depictions, especially in the Middle East.
What, show elongated skull people?
Yeah, very much. We were in Lebanon in, I think it was April, just after we finished our tour of Egypt, and a lot of the ancient artifacts in the museum there showed either portrayals of people with enormous conehead hats or coneheads themselves, and I think that's the beginning of the smoking gun of the possible origin place is in the Middle Eastern area.
Do you also find the red-headed people in that region also?
Yeah, well, the great thing is that the origin of red hair is Iraq, Iran, and Afghanistan. It's not Ireland and Scotland. So you still have a lot of people to this day who, in those countries, who have reddish hair, usually reddish auburn hair, not carrot tops like the Irish and the Scots, but a deep, rich red, which, especially in sunlight, is almost like fire.
Okay,
and that's exactly what we find in Paracas. The royal people of Paracas, all the examples I've seen that actually still have hair attached to their elongated skulls, it's dark red auburn. Not black.
Okay, but it's also not bright red like you would think, an Irish person, a ginger would have.
No, nor anyone who is like Viking or Nordic or whatever. It's a very specific shade, and in places like Cusco, and other parts of the highlands of Peru and Bolivia, I've met people who have that hair color, and I've been cocky enough to go up to them and ask them, "Have you dyed your hair?" And they go, "No, this comes from, this is my mother's side of the family. It goes way back in time, long before the Spanish ever arrived."
See, I love this connection with the red hair. I mean, I don't know from a genetic point of view, if having red hair is some, that kind of color, if there's like, if it's a recessive thing or a dominant thing, or you have to have like a certain mix in order for your hair to be that color or whatever. But I think it's an interesting thread that you keep pulling through things. Yet another marker.
Well, it is because, I spent quite a bit of time in Polynesia, and there in New Zealand, Tahiti, Easter Island, and Hawaii, they also have this ancient strain of this reddish hair, which is most likely pre so-called Polynesian. We do know that in New Zealand, most likely, and Tahiti, and Easter Island, and Hawaii, there were people living in those places before the major Polynesian migrations took place. And these people are what they call Ahu, which means reddish hair.
What about Australia? Do you know if they have any populations that have the red hair too?
No. All I've found out recently is that there are a number of elongated skulls that have been found in a particular area, I believe in between Sydney and Melbourne, inland, and they don't appear to be related to the Aboriginal people whatsoever. The Aboriginal people have lived there 40,000 to 60,000 years, but there seems to have been another race of people living in Australia thousands of years before it was discovered by Europeans, and these people most likely are not related to the Aborigines whatsoever.
See, that's kind of mind-blowing. I haven't heard that little piece of information, that there was yet a different group than the Aborigines. All right, different question, and I don't mean to keep going off. Okay, so they have this red hair going on. What about, skin tone? I mean, if I think of someone that is from South America, I would think they would have, an olivey kind of skin tone with a maybe curly, wavy kind of hair. I mean, not, a nappy hair kind of thing. Do you find those same characteristics in some of these other groups?
Well, unfortunately, we haven't been able to find any examples of skin which, has not become heavily discolored, as in blackened through time, because you are talking about people who are 2,000 plus years old. But genetically speaking, from what I've learned, it's likely that anyone who has reddish brown hair would have a lighter complexion, and possibly not brown eyes, which are typical to Native Americans, but possibly greenish or even blue. But we would have to find a perfect mummy in order to be able to prove that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was just thinking in the more current groups in Polynesia, if what they look like, if there was, I mean, I know that I think that there is, groups that have gone all around, and that there are connections between different races around the world. And so I just am going, okay, so if we have this in South America and we have something similar, what do they look like here? Because maybe it could give us an answer to what's going on over there. That was kind of where I was going.
Yeah.
So, okay, so I understand that there's some really, really new groundbreaking information that you've just gotten a hold of, which I don't really know what it is, and maybe you'll talk about it a little bit.
Well, one unfortunate thing is half an hour before I came on air with you, I was told by the people who were actually doing the research that I'm not allowed to talk about it. But what I can specifically, but what I can tell you, because a lot of people have been intrigued with the DNA testing that we've been attempting to do, and it's been 3 years of complications and nefarious activities and all sorts of things going on. But what I did find out today was that the testing that we're planning on doing has moved another step forward, in that it looks like we will have government approval to, in Peru, to have testing of Paracas elongated skulls performed, so that samples can be sent to laboratories in other countries for the actual DNA testing, because there is no DNA testing facility in Peru that can handle ancient DNA, nor are there any carbon-14 labs or anything of that nature. So that's very much a positive note, and we're getting inklings that there is partial ancestry from the Middle East on the coast of Peru, in that some group seemingly did migrate from the Middle East to the coast of Peru, then mixed with the native population, so it's a theory that I've been working on for about 3 years, and we're getting inklings that is the fact, that the Paracas ancestors didn't cross the Bering Land Bridge and walk all their way down to the coast of Peru, but that at least part of their ancestry came by sea, and most likely came from the Middle East over a long period of time.
But I mean, that's just really a different, I don't even know how to express this. I mean, there has been commentary that they were, from China, they were Mongols, they were Polynesians, they were, all kinds of people. This is the first time I'm hearing the Middle East, and that just kind of puts it into a different They were Egyptian. That's it.
Well, it's really interesting because also I've been a sailor most of my life, and so studying ancient migration patterns intrigues me, and I regard ancient people as being at least as intelligent as we are, and not a bunch of idiots who sat around the campfire all day, but they had the capability of migrating great distances. And so one curious note is that in the Solomon Islands, which are in between, I believe, the Middle East and Australia, you have Vanuatu, and on Vanuatu and neighboring islands, those people practice cranial deformation. So they don't fit in the picture at all as regards the other groups, unless you consult the oral tradition. And I was able to find on the internet just a quote from an old man from that area, from Vanuatu, who said, "I don't care what what Western archaeologists say about my people, that we traveled down the coast of Asia to reach this island. My ancestors came from Egypt." So bingo, there you have the possible connection between Egypt all the way through Polynesia to the west coast of South America.
Well, okay. But but that opens up a whole other can of worms. I'm going to say more in a technical point of view, cultural point of view, because if you're saying that the Paracas people were from like 800 BC or whatever, I mean, they sounded fairly recent. Egypt had a lot more technology than that. They had writing. They built the pyramids. Come on.
Well, well, no, they didn't.
I was just being a little facetious there.
Yeah, that's a completely different topic. But no, I'm not saying an Egyptian connection with South America. I'm talking about a possible Middle Eastern connection. But it's just interesting that these people from Vanuatu, or this man from Vanuatu, would say, my ancestors, or at least part of them, came from Egypt. We didn't migrate down through Korea or something like that, and here and there, and that's where it's always interesting to, if it's possible, to compare oral tradition with what archaeology tries to say, because sometimes there's an overlap and sometimes there's a complete gap between the two. But I would take oral tradition over archaeology 24 hours a day, because people have a tendency to know their ancestors and who they were, as compared to somebody from a completely different culture digging in the ground and making presumptions about who somebody was.
Well, that seems to be evident everywhere
Yes.
where they just like make up stuff and put it out there and go, oh, well, this is what it is. And they don't have a clue what they're talking about.
Yeah, they try to make things often fit their theory, even if it shouldn't. Such as another basic example is how were the great stone figures on Easter Island moved? I know quite a renowned royal person on Easter Island, and she said, no archaeologist has ever come and asked our family how all of this work was done. They just make up their own theories. And there you go. Yeah. If you could, if you'd actually ask the descendants, how did your ancestors do this work, then you would have the basis of a theory that you could work on, rather than making up your own.
But then in the same breath, they think that, the people are idiots and don't really know their own history, so they have to make up a history for them and say, well, this is what happened. Because I
know, and that's one of the most that's one of the reasons I do what I do, because I find that very offensive. And always have. I've been involved with Native people since I was a child, and have always respected that they have knowledge of who they are and where they came from. And for an academic to simply say, well, I won't interview these people because I have a better theory than they do, is really kind of weird.
It's insulting.
It is, very.
Well, let me ask you this question. I'm going to kind of change topics here. I mean, we're talking about the elongated skulls, and many times people make the assumption that when you see elongated skulls, there are instances of trepanation. Is that a common occurrence, or is that common, or was trepanation done globally, universally in people?
I wouldn't say universally, but it's another fascinating aspect of the Paracas people, this mysterious people whose civilization, appears out of nowhere around 800 BC. They were masters at brain surgery, and some studies of excavations in graveyards in Peru have shown that at least 50% of the patients who had cranial or who had trepanation performed lived for a number of years after the surgery. So that's it's quite curious that a so-called primitive people would have, to some degree, mastered one of the most difficult, if not the most difficult, surgical operation known.
Was it more prevalent in the Paracas area, or was it found all over the region?
It was quite prevalent in the Paracas Nazca area, also to some degree up around Lake Titicaca, and amongst the Inca themselves.
I mean, I just find that fascinating. I was reading this one thing that said that the number of skulls that they've found where it appears that the person died from those cultures was very few, but when they try to do a similar procedure in more modern times, before anesthesia, before hygienic purposes, like in the 1700s, 1800s, that the majority of the people died.
Well, that's true, and actually, there is evidence that the Paracas did have anesthesia. They used coca leaf, which is an as well as corned beer, to anesthetize the patient, and also because of course that's a terrible thing for infection when you have something the size of in some cases these the holes that were cut in the skull were the size of a silver dollar, and so how are you going to cover that to make sure killing the person? But for some reason they knew to place either a thin sheet of silver or a thin sheet of gold over top of the wound, and gold is an excellent metal because it doesn't react to the body, and silver is antibiotic. So after they would put this thin circular or square sheet on, and then of course cover it with cotton, et cetera, over time the skin is going to come and encircle the area, and then the bone can recover underneath it.
I just think that that's amazing, that they had that technology to do that. Were the Paracas people builders? Did they have, other than the beginning of the Nazca lines, did they have any, and I'm going to put this in quotes, monumental architecture that's attached to them?
Well, the problem is that they were victims of an environment that wasn't rich in stone. It's basically all sand with, like river stone sort of sizes. Cusco and Tiwanaku areas are different because you have it's all volcanic, and you have mountains that are solid stone. So obviously megalithic work was done in the highlands, but not on the coast. They did build huge, or actually relatively huge pyramidal structures out of adobe brick. In some cases, millions of bricks making up a large temple. And then also the royal Paracas lived in houses that were constructed underground.
That's smart.
Yeah.
And so they have been found. Some of these were they just pit houses, or were they literally underground?
They were underground rooms. On average, I would think probably, not large. It would be you'd have an access hole, and then you'd have a room underground, which would be probably something like 12 feet by 12 feet, just a place more or less to sleep. But they found a small city in Paracas with several hundred of these underground houses.
The big screen TV, they're set.
Yeah. Parking for 3 Porsches.
Right. Well, that would just be in the pyramid.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Peru and the antiquities, in Peru and Bolivia. You've come on the show a number of times, and it is just so frustrating to me to find out over time that not really anything is being done down there. Has that changed? It's been kind of a while since you've been on last, but has there been any more interest taken in what's going on from an archaeological and research point of view?
There is, especially in Bolivia. We were in Bolivia last week, or was it even that long ago? Up in the Tiwanaku and Lake Titicaca area, and we got to spend time with a Bolivian author called Antonio Portugal, who's written, I think, 8 books, and he's worked with some of the prominent archaeologists, both Bolivian and foreign, for, I think, 4 decades. And he showed me photographs of megalithic sites which are underground, that they have uncovered, but have had to cover back up until proper funding is found, because making a discovery like that, local people, if they find out that that you're digging at a site that has not been heard about before, there's a great tendency of looting. So he showed me photographs of walls with multi-ton stone blocks, tight-fitting, in the Lake Titicaca area that have had to be covered back up until some future funding can be found. He also did a sonogram or echo, I can't remember the term, but anyway, some kind of echo machine that was able to, or ground penetrating radar sort of machinery. And they've discovered a number of chambers underneath Tiwanaku, which are part of the original construction. And so he believes that there's a whole system of tunnels and chambers underneath the Tiwanaku and Pumapunku area, which are thousands of years old.
Well, from what I understand, that whole area is riddled with tunnels, or that there are tunnels there that just extend really far in distance, or at least they allegedly extend really far distance.
Yeah, well, there are so many legends about that. There's another study that was done by a French team using ground penetrating radar, I think from an airplane, over Cusco. And they found out that there is definitely a tunnel that connects Sacsayhuaman, which is one of the largest megalithic sites in the Americas. And it's located, well, if it was daylight, I could see it out the window. But it's located about 2 miles from the center of Cusco. And so this tunnel goes underneath Sacsayhuaman, underneath the city of Cusco, and goes at least as far as this megalithic building called the Coricancha. It may even go farther. But so there is, there is mounting evidence that some of the oral traditions of tunnels and mysterious chambers and lost ancient high technology, that this stuff is real and not just the stuff of fantasy or movies.
I saw that there were some pictures posted, but there were very few, of them doing construction in Cusco, where they kind of tore out the street to put in new, I don't know, plumbing or something. I couldn't quite figure. I don't remember what they were doing. When they were doing that, when they dug down into the ground, were there any archaeologists on hand, documenting anything that they might have found down there before they sealed it back up?
Oh, definitely. That what they were doing actually was laying fiber optic cable, which is probably what I'm using right now, and if I'm lucky. And they discovered some beautiful stone walls and parts of sections of buildings, and a staircase that went down made of very tight-fitting stones. And so the controversy went on for at least 4 months as to what to do about it, because it is a major street in Cusco that carries a lot of traffic. And so the battle was between the archaeologists who wanted to keep digging, and the rest of the people who said, we need the road back. And unfortunately, they did document everything, but unfortunately, the people who wanted it to be a road won, and so now it's covered in blacktop again.
I fought the road and the road won. Okay. Yeah. But that actually brings up another really interesting point or thought, is that if there were these well, let me ask a different question. So how far down did they go? How far down did they dig?
I think only about 15 feet. Because
only 15 feet?
Well, they did the initial excavation for the fiber optics, and then they started to find artifacts. And then the archaeologists came in for, I think, a month or two and kept going down to some degree, but then it became the battle between, are you going to keep digging, or can we have the road back? And there are stories that there are many buildings underneath the present-day city of Cusco anyway that are megalithic in nature and were constructed long before the Inca, that the Inca, in fact, discovered Cusco as an abandoned city. So this lends, this little example of the street lends credence to that is true.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, I'm thinking, okay, they went down 15 feet. So when you're talking about something like the Coricancha, that might even be a much later megalithic construction compared to what was down 15 feet. And some way earlier civilization kind of thing.
Well, they haven't really dug down to find the foundation of the Coricancha yet, so it could be sitting on top of something more profound. There are a lot of stories that there is, especially from indigenous people, that there is a tunnel system underneath the city that nothing, you can't dig it up now because people are, 500,000 people are using Cusco as a modern day city. So the chance that a major excavation can be done is slim to zero. But what I look for, since we spend a lot of time in Cusco, are people doing possible additions to their colonial house, like in the yard. They want to add a room on, so they're going down to pour a concrete foundation, and then, wow, they discover that they've got a megalithic wall, underneath the grass.
Yeah. See, I wouldn't be pouring a concrete foundation if I had that.
No, and the other problem is that if you do find something which is Inca or older on your property, the government can just take your house. So these are quiet stories I hear from people, but I do know that there was one, a very great friend of mine who's a profound anthropologist here in Cusco. He said that a friend of his who owns a hotel wanted to make an extension, and so they started to dig down to pour concrete, and they discovered, this megalithic structure. And unfortunately, they had to just cover it back over because otherwise he was afraid that the government would say, well, guess what? We're buying your house or your hotel, and you're going to have to move somewhere.
I just keep thinking, I mean, I know that there is the custom of, covering over old stuff, to make the new place, although, but it just makes me go, okay, so if that's down there, what's below that? It just makes my mind go.
Well, it does. And have you been to Egypt yet?
No.
Well,
but I'm working on it. I have started I'm going someplace fund.
Well, you'll have to meet my friends, the Awiyans, who carry the oral tradition of Egypt. And one day, on I think the first trip I made when we had a tour with Stephen Mailer, I had nothing to do, so I decided to walk up onto the Giza Plateau. And Yusuf, who is an expert in ancient Egypt, said, "Well, I'll come with you." And he took me, because he has influence, he took me what is normally called out of bounds to tourists. And we wound up 3 stories underneath the Giza Plateau in this tunnel system. And so it's very true. There's so much that's underground. Even Zahi Hawass agrees with us that, and if people don't know who Zahi Hawass is, he used to be the head of the Supreme Council of Antiquities in Egypt. He agrees that only 15% of ancient Egypt has been discovered, that the other 85% is still under the sand. And we're talking megalithic, ancient high technology work. So
that is cool.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, so Daria, and I'm not going to try to say her last name because I can't pronounce it. I already know that in advance. And she wanted to know if you are going to be back in Egypt and if you give tours there or you take groups there, I guess.
Once a year. And, I may be biased, but I believe that the people I work with there know more than anybody on the planet, because they can trace their family history back thousands of years. They can trace themselves back probably before the dynastic Egyptians. And those are the Awian family. They live across the street from the Sphinx. Their father, Hakim, was the expert he was the most famous and best guide of ancient Egypt. And so if anyone wants to, we'll be going in April. So if you look at my website, hiddenincatours.com, on the front page, there's a link to our Egypt tour, and we show people stuff that blows their minds. It's a real Indiana Jones adventure without the popcorn and commercials.
But the popcorn's pretty good.
Well, popcorn's good.
Popcorn's good. So we have about 3 more minutes. What's coming up for you? Trip in September. Is it September? Because that's, Daria says, already booked for September. So is it in September?
No, it's in April.
Oh, okay. Anyway.
Let's... what are we up to? We have a number of short tours in the next couple of weeks. We're taking a group into the Amazon to experience ayahuasca. Then we're going to Australia for 3 weeks and to do some lectures, and then spend a week in New Zealand with the Maori people. And then in October, we have a tour with Hugh Newman of the Highlands of Peru, looking for possible evidence of an Atlantean city that people can join. And February, we're exploring all of the ancient cultures of Mexico. And then April is our tour of Egypt.
Boy, you're just everywhere.
I should learn to sit down once in a while. I am now.
Yeah. Also, please quickly tell people about your videos, because those are really great, and you share so much information with people.
Well, I have 750 videos so far on my YouTube channel. I normally put one up every, and so it's under my name, Brien Foerster. You'll have to look at the proper spelling of my name because it's not the normal way. But yeah, my YouTube channel, a lot of videos, and I just passed the 20 million mark. So it's actually people more by my YouTube videos, I guess, than anything else, which is fine with me. It's a lot easier to make a YouTube video than it is to write a book.
I'm hearing you, brother. I'm hearing you. Yes, I do. But your book, if somebody wants to get it, where would they go to find it? Your elongated skull book.
It and the 15 other books I've written are all on Amazon, both in paperback form and also all forms of ebook too, or at least an ebook that works on any possible kind of device.
Excellent. Brien, always a pleasure having you.
Well, it's always a pleasure, Doctor. The time just flies.
It does. It does. Well, I'm going to let you go, and you'll just have to keep me informed when you have some more juicy information that you're ready to come on and talk about, or a book, or, whatever. Okay, that'd be great. Maybe after our trip to Mexico, because we're going to be covering the Toltec, the Olmec, the Aztec, and the Maya. So actually, I feel like sending you with my list of questions for Australia and New Zealand, because I'm working on a project. But it's good questions. Oh, we're actually going to see what are called the Gosford glyphs, which are supposed Egyptian hieroglyphics. Mm-hmm. And so that I will definitely document. Good. Anyway, the music started, so I got to go. Okay. All right. Bye, Brien. Thank you, Doctor. All right. That's Brien Foerster. His webpage is hiddenincatours.com. And next week, we have the infamous Jim Marrs coming on to talk about, is corporate America killing us? And in the second hour, we have Richard Saunders coming on talking about extraterrestrials and underground bases. And so until next time, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Just Energy Radio. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser to www.justenergyradio.com.